welcome everybody this holiday season on a nice crisp morning that you've come to hear our county executive. Without further ado, actually there is further ado. I want to ask anyone present if they have any announcements. At this holiday season, I know there are a lot of things going on in the community and they ought to be announced. Anyone? Yes, over there. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Susan Riley from the Mamaroneck Library, and I wanted to let Mamaroneck residents to know that tomorrow is the annual budget vote and trustee election from 7 a.m. until 9 p.m. So if you live in Mamaroneck, the village of Mamaroneck, please come and vote. Thank you. At the library. At the library.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mary Lee? Loud.
Martin Luther King event. So it's her 13th of January. Someone just one of our folks here has any of the posters. We'll have flyers, but in any case, it's the 13th on Sunday. 2 in the afternoon over at Commons. Two professors talking about
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other announcements? I'm sorry.
I'm Rachel Escroft. I'm from the Senator Mayor's office, and on Thursday from 4 to 6, we'll be having a holiday open house at the Westchester Senior Center. Everyone is welcome. And we're accepting donations as well.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Nina? I'm going to turn the program over to Nina.
Good morning, everyone. As is our custom, we invite the county executive to speak every December. And I would introduce George, except that he's ubiquitous. So we all know George. We know him from Rye. We know him when he was in the legislature, and now we know him as our county executive. And what we normally do when we do this program with the county executive is we send him 4 general topics, or her, there may one day be a, and we ask them to tailor some of their remarks to answer those questions, but we leave it open broadly because we know that anyone who is here today may have a question that they seek to have answered, and we want to have enough time for Q&A, and thus we did try to start punctually. I think we did pretty well today. So let me just tell you briefly the topics that we sent to George to be addressed. The first is taxes. I think we all know the story there. We have a budget deficit that's projected at about $39 million. That's probably wrong, but I think that George can correct it if it is. So the questions we had for George regarding this is, what are the budget priorities that he has going forward? What are his ideas for helping Westchester residents deal with the limitations placed by the new tax law on the deductibility of state and local taxes? And in addition to the proposed 2% tax increase, what are the plans to utilize any one-shot source of revenue to balance the budget this year? For instance, the sale of parklands or the Westchester County parking lot. And would you have ideas going forward after that? The second broad topic we had is infrastructure. It's always a concern. It comes up often in our breakfast here. Sewer lines, roads, bridges, public transportation. What is the county executive's, what are his priorities with respect to improving the infrastructure within the county? The third, of course, is what's going to happen to the Westchester County Airport? What is his view on privatizing the county airport? And does he believe it can be run efficiently and profitably by the government, and how and why? And finally, the last one, and I must confess this is one that has always been of concern to me, is what is the status of the signing of the lease for the $1.2 billion North 60 Biotech Hub? That was approved by the Board of Legislatures in 2017, but it's been delayed, and perhaps its viability is in fact threatened. And the project was expected to generate both revenue and jobs, etc. So those are our 4 questions that come directly from the Summit Board. There's a lot of other things, so hang on to your thoughts, and at the end we promise to have hopefully a lengthy and hearty Q&A for everyone. So without any further ado, our county executive. Thank you, George.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm always a little tempted when you're speaking, and I know that my voice is going into the camera, as opposed to when I speak to be heard in a room. This is how Howard Dean lost his presidential race, by screaming into what turned out to be a TV camera microphone. But, you know, this is probably, when I looked at my schedule, the most comfortable room to walk into, because I walk into this room every month. I usually sit in the back, and I try to sit and listen to the full program if I can. And I've been coming to the summit as long as anybody here has been. I remember the morning that we had the summit in 2001 in September when 9/11 hit. We were at the other diner at the time. And how many times we've heard so many other people standing here, including my predecessor, when he spoke about it. So for me to come into communities that I've represented for 27 years is a little like, you know, trying to give a speech at the dinner table to your family. We have talked individually on these things so often, so I'll try to keep my prepared remarks. And you can see, I mean, you guys know, I don't usually script myself very much. There's no written sheet of paper in front of me about what I'm going to say. I'm going to talk very generally about how I think this first year has gone and where we have to go. And we'll touch on these points and then open it up to questions until Nina brings out the hook. The first thing is really to enter the process. And I did speak a year ago as county executive-elect, not yet in office. The job of being county executive is bigger than anybody can understand before you get into it. And you know my resume. I've served in all these different positions. I was a county legislator and chairman of the Board of Legislators 20 years ago, both houses of the state legislature. I've chaired my political party for 2 years. So I had a resume, in addition to my business career, that would give you reason to think I could walk in the door on day one and be ready to go. But the size and scope of county government and the responsibilities of being executive in the county government is serious. And I have to tell you, I watch what's happening in Washington, D.C., a person who is not prepared to be president, walking in the door, and apparently after 2 years not really preparing to be president. I looked at my responsibilities much, much smaller in scope, much more humbly. This is a $1.9 billion budget. There are over 4,000 employees. The county government has responsibility to treat sewerage, run a bus system, run a jail, and a probation department. We have a public health component. We have a mental health component. We run 55 parks around the county that differ from nature centers like the Reed Sanctuary and Marshlands, the Playland, which is obviously a very unique facility, Saxon Woods, Glen Island, you name it, and then all across the northern part of the county. We have a certain responsibility in running an airport, running a county center, an exhibit hall. So it's a really far-flung administrative responsibility to run this county. And also to do it humbly, because we have had, over historic years, terrific leadership in this county, in both political parties. Ed McCallion, a Republican, Andy O'Rourke, a Republican, Aldo Bello, a Democrat, Andy Spano, a Democrat, all did very impressive things over those years. And any of us of a certain age, I grew up in the county, lived here almost all my life. I had 5 years of corporate relocation in the early 80s. But absent that, my 65 years I've lived in this county. And I remember when the bus system was 3 different bus systems and different letters and numbers, and they didn't coordinate. And that got coordinated by the energy of a county executive, Aldo Bello. And the modernization of the airport, which is now 35 years old, but was modernized at the time, the same for the county center, was done under Andy O'Rourke. And a host of different things that have been over the years. So I'm in a job where I've got a lot to prove to myself before I can consider myself in the same breath as some of those individuals. But I did come into office in an election, candidly, which I didn't think I was going to win until very late in the election cycle, in Rob Astorino, very, very popular guy, very well known. He had won twice before by very large numbers, and he had a hell of a lot more money than I did. And up until the very end, I wasn't sure that I was going to win at all. I thought I was standing up for certain principles, I think shared principles, but the chances of success did not look obvious. In that wave that happened in 2017, it happened again in 2018. You could make the case that it wasn't a great raising up of me as an individual, that I was caught up in something that was bigger, a reaction to what was happening in Washington. But whatever happened, I got the opportunity to have this job. And I've taken it with both hands, with all of the energy and effort that I can. And you, more so than any other communities, except for Rye, Larchmont, and Mamaroneck, you know how much time and energy I put into things, how much I am insistent upon continuing, not just showing up at things, but trying to have substance and good public policy. I'm joined today by other people in public office. Nancy Seligson is here, Jane Eny is here, Sabrina Fiddleman is here. We've just been joined by Catherine Parker, County Legislative Majority Leader. If I look up and down quickly, I'll see Bubba Finelli on the village board, and certainly a lot of past elected officials, if I've missed anybody, school board members and so forth. This community has a history of public service. And when you run for office, okay, Tom Murphy, I'm sorry, Tom said hello, Mayor. See, that's what happens when you start naming people. You get lost in the naming and you miss the point. Let me repeat the point, with Tom included in the list. The history of public service in this community is not about get into office and hire your brother or your brother-in-law. It's not about how much money can you make while you're in office. Every single public official, past and present, in Larchmont Village, Mamaroneck Town, the school district, and the county legislators who have represented this area have made zero money in these offices. We go in and we do it because something inside of us says we think we can make a contribution. And that's the way I've approached being county executive. Now, in this first year, the single most important thing, in my judgment, was to stabilize the finances of the county. But the second most important thing was to turn the direction of this county's philosophy back to what I consider to be mainstream Westchester. My predecessor, whom I don't criticize, this is his heartfelt belief, held very conservative views that I believe were not in step with the majority of people in Westchester County. So some of the things we did besides hitting 8 o'clock, some of the things we did early on were symbolic in our term of office. We banned the gun show from Westchester County Center. Now, we believe that that was not symbolic of what Westchester people want to see. A portion of Westchester people want to see it, but the majority of people did not want to see that, and so we banned that. We've also done a host of things that Board of Legislators, in some cases, have passed legislation. In some cases, it's been executive orders on my behalf. But we've done things like create earned sick leave, so that individuals who work know that they have some protection if they get sick. We have passed and signed into law legislation that says that you can't put on your application for employment a box that says, have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime? We did that by executive order within our government, and then it's been passed now as a standard equivalent. You can ask that question to a person in an interview. It's a perfectly legitimate line of discussion. But when you put it on the application and you get 30 applications, it's routinely used as a means to eliminate the person from consideration for no other reason than they checked off that box. And we want to give people a chance, if they've gotten past a criminal action or being arrested, maybe unfairly, to being able to at least still be able to compete and have a second chance at life. And a host of legislation like that, raising the age of tobacco to 21 years of age, accomplished by the legislature with my support in signing into office. And then some things that are very small and symbolic. The first thing I did on the job that New Year's Eve night, along with banning the gun show, was banning the name of elected officials on signage. Possibly the least important thing that matters to you, except it's a symbol. It's a symbol, and it's an important symbol. The assets of Westchester County are not owned by the county executive of the day. They're owned by the people of Westchester County. They have always been owned by the people of Westchester County. So when a county executive, whoever he or she is, in the short term makes decisions, keep in mind your time in office is temporary. It's temporary. And therefore, you shouldn't worry about your self-aggrandizement. You should worry about making decisions that have long run. Get your names off the signs. Stop thinking about it as your county for 4 years, because it isn't. And I'm as happy that I could do that on the first day on the job, and the Board of Legislators turned that into a law. Now to the substance of the responsibilities we have. Let's talk finances and taxes. Westchester County has a budget. We just passed it yesterday, 13-4 vote for 2019. It's a $1.9 billion budget. To put it into perspective, New York State's budget is about $165 billion. So $165 billion for the state. Westchester is 1.9, and you have village and town officials here. The local budgets run in the range of 20 million, give or take 40 million for the town, 36 million. So you're in the tens of millions at the local level. You're at the just shy of 2 billion at the county level, and then multiple billions, 165 billion at the state level. And the federal government, trillions, and we don't really know if they're, if they're just going to operate with a budget or continuing resolutions. But the scope that I mentioned at 100 miles an hour at the opening comment, we do a variety of different services that are regional in nature. And when people say, what does the county government do? Here's the simple paragraph. We provide regional services across an area that includes 45 different municipalities that are necessary to be done. They're not done by the state, and they're not by the local governments. The county takes that responsibility. In other states, without county government, the state does most of these functions, and then some of them are done locally. But in New York State and some other states in the nation, the county governments have been charged with these regional functions. And if you think about what it is to treat sewerage, we have this sort of mixed responsibility. Some of it is local, some of it is county. The logic is that it should all be a regional function. It should all be a county function. County should take on responsibility for that. As soon as we have enough money, we probably will do that. But the reality of it is that people don't interact with those services regularly enough to understand what the county does. How many of you have ever served a term in the county jail? Raise your hand. Not all of my state legislative friends can make that claim. And of course, since you haven't been in jail, you didn't get out of jail and go on to probation, right? So you've had no interaction with the probation department, no interaction with the county jail. The county government has to run those two departments. They're relatively large departments of county government. And for those of us who are, may I say, middle class, upper middle class, almost universally white, we don't interact with those two departments of county government very much. How many of you have been on a Metro-North train into the city in the last year? Raise your hand at least once. Nearly everybody. How many of you have been on a Beeline bus in the last year? Raise your hand. Now, they're both forms of mass transit. What's the difference? Out here in suburbia, mass transit, the bus system, isn't needed by those of us who have cars. We take the train in the city, it's a hassle, it's expensive, blah, 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 blah. So we take mass transit when we think it benefits us. And we don't need to have it when we don't think it does benefit us. But there are people who need that Beeline bus system. And if you don't believe me, come with me to an area called Petrillo Plaza in the heart of Mount Vernon. And you will watch Beeline buses by the score filled to the brim with people who don't have cars but have to go to work, have to go to school, go to medical appointments and things of that nature. And it's also true right outside the county office building on Martine Avenue, where right across the street buses queue up and people come and go. So we run a bus system that many of us don't use at all. I don't expect that we want to talk about sewerage here at the breakfast table, but the county government has the responsibility for sewer treatment. And what goes out into the Long Island Sound, which we all care about deeply, and what goes out into the Hudson River, has to be of a certain high level of cleanliness in order to maintain public health. And the county government runs that system. And to run that system is invisible. When you leave the restroom, you don't really think a lot about what happens after that, except that it's going to disappear someplace, and it's going to be done in a proper, healthy fashion. We do that. This restaurant and every other restaurant has to be checked systematically to make sure that there's sanitary conditions in the kitchen. Who does that? The county health department does with sanitarians. And not only that, they also go out and check the quality of the water quality in pools, private pools as well as public pools. So when you look at a variety of these regional functions, that's what the county government does. The $1.9 billion budget that effectuates these things also involves itself in the delivery of social services to the needy of the county. It is administered through the county government. And the county's social service offices, as they exist, are beehives of activity. And if you've never had to be there, and thank God if any of us have never had to need social service benefits, you will still see people in Mount Vernon, in White Plains, in the various offices that we have in Peekskill, that get a benefit partially funded by state and federal government, partially administered by us, the county government. So, when my predecessor, because he held a philosophy that said, we are not going to raise property taxes, that is a very popular thing to say. I understand it. I pay taxes, you pay taxes, and nobody likes paying property taxes. Nobody likes paying taxes in general. If you can get away with it without having to do it, you do it. But the bottom line is, the services that I just described do not come out of the clear blue sky. They have to be paid for, in part, by county property taxes. We probably levy somewhere north of $570 million a year in aggregate property taxes collected from around the area. 65% of the services of county government are mandated. That's a round number. You could debate this one and that. It could be 68%, it could be 62%, but somewhere in that range of those things were mandated. The single biggest mandate we have is over a $200 million payment that the county government makes every year to the state government to cover what amounts to about 25% of the cost of Medicaid in the county. The county does not administer the Medicaid program. The county does not set up the rules for Medicaid eligibility. New York State has a very extensive Medicaid program. As an example, here in New York, If you're on Medicaid, which is health care to the indigent or to those who have become indigent, such as long-term care late in your life when you've exhausted all of your resources, Medicaid in New York State covers dental work. In South Carolina, it does not. When people say it's cheaper in South Carolina, I say, good, don't have dental problems when you're on Medicaid. And by the way, don't look for mass transportation in South Carolina. These states are different. They're structured differently with different services. In terms of the tax structure for the county, county taxes, depending on the municipality, range somewhere in the vicinity of 20 to 25% of your tax bill. In round numbers, if you take a $20,000 total taxes that you pay, I understand a lot of you pay more than that, multiply it up. Divide it down if you pay less. But if you pay $20,000 in property taxes, you're probably paying about $13,500 to the school district in round numbers. You're probably paying about $3,500 to $4,000 to the county. And the remainder, which falls somewhere between $2,500 to $3,000, is a combination of village and town, if you live in a village, or town, if you just live in the town, or like I do in the city of Rye, city taxes. So $3,500 or so, maybe a little less, and then a smaller amount still for the municipals, the bulk in the schools. When we went 7 years without raising county property taxes, we saved you money on the one line that represents about 20 to 25% of your overall tax bill. And most likely, you didn't feel the benefit of any savings. However, that 7-year period of time meant that we reduced our workforce by 1,000 workers. It meant that we did not invest capital in the various things that we're required to spend capital on, our physical plants, our parks department, upgrading our information technologies, a host of different things that lay fallow during that period of time. That is what I inherited when I walked in the door. I walked in the door with an expectation that we would not raise taxes ever, and a reality of diminishing county physical plant that after 7 years you kick the can down the road and now you have to be able to deal with it. So what we've tried to do in this budget is to begin the process of the road back. That meant that we have a property tax increase of 2%. That 2% is below the tax cap number. It's below some of the percentages of certain municipal governments, depends on which one you look at. That number of 2% is below Putnam County and below Rockland County's increases this year. And let me, just discuss the obvious. I'm a Democrat coming into office after 8 years of a Republican. And the expectation is, those Democrats are going to go crazy. They're going to raise my taxes. We can't trust them. We kept it down to a 2% increase. And it was not easy to do because we had a $60 million deficit to close. And that $60 million deficit came because we did some things that had to be done. We got all of the open union contracts negotiated, signed, approved, and done. Every county employee who's in a bargaining unit is now operating under a contract. And we have predictable costs for 19, 20, and 21 because we know what our labor costs are. When you have open-ended contracts, those things could be any number and you don't know how to budget for it until it hits you. And I might add, on the CSEA contract, which is the biggest contract, 3,200 employees, 7 years they were out of a contract. When we closed that negotiation, they gave us 2 years of zero. The first 2 years, no increase. And every member of the union made a contribution to their health care. Those were things that had not happened before. When the vote was ratified by the union, it was pretty close. It was not automatic. And, the political rhetoric, the Democrats are going to come, he's going to give the store away. We didn't give the store away. We negotiated a fair contract given the circumstances we had. The union understood it, realized that this was the practical world that we live in, and ratified the deal. We had an opportunity to, just before I took office, have the extension of the Liberty Lines contract, the bus contract, with the company. It's a public-private partnership. Extended 5 years as is. Legislators told us, hold on, don't do that. Negotiate it, take a fresh look at it. So we did. At the end of this year, we've negotiated a 5-year extension that's been ratified. The county saves $4 million a year on a renegotiated contract. If we had just reauthorized it, that $4 million savings wouldn't be there. So issue by issue by issue, in addition to the financial structure of the budget and the taxation, we're trying to look at every single deal that's been struck or has been discussed, which gets me to some of the questions you've asked me about specific situations. Let's deal first with the North 60. What the North 60 represents is 60 acres of county-owned land, non-park land, general municipal purpose land, that exists to the north of the medical center as you drive north on the Sprainbrook Parkway. So if you're on the Sprainbrook Parkway, you're heading north to the Hawthorne Interchange, you're going either to the Conic or the Sawmill. Off to your left-hand side, you see this big complex of county facilities. The jail is over there. I know you haven't been there, so you haven't seen it. The jail is over there, the Westchester Medical Center, which is no longer owned by the county government, as it once was. And just north of the medical center, you see a big open piece of land. That's 60 acres of land that the county owns. A proposal was put out for RFP 6-7 years ago to accept development proposals for that land. One of the proposals came from John Ferrari, who is the person who actually developed the Children's Hospital next to the Westchester Medical Center. And it was a proposal for a biotech facility that involved commercial space for buildings that would accommodate labs and the research necessary in the biotech industry, some retail, small hotel component, and all of that was in a lease, as Nina pointed out, that was signed by the Board of Legislators at the end of 2017. Now, my predecessor, who negotiated the lease, did not sign it before he left office. So I come in, we have a lease, sign this lease, and we have a deal. Well, how come it's not signed already? Can we look into this so we understand what it is? You know? And as we looked into it, we had negotiation, we liked the concept of it. In the middle of discussing it, the developer said, oh, by the way, we want to add housing to the proposal. Well, wait a minute, housing is a big issue. It can trigger school population and additional expense. We ought to look into that before we sign it. And I said, the Board of Legislators, which approved the lease in its prior iteration, ought to be able to see that this is a significantly major change to add housing. And in the process of doing that, we have gone through an additional review process. Now, you know, the paper reported it as, well, they're delaying it. Well, you know, I'm not into that fake news stuff like some people are. I think the press should report whatever it thinks. But then, when you read the press, you should also listen to other points of view and draw an intelligent judgment. You shouldn't take what I say as gospel, and you shouldn't take what's written as gospel. Use your own critical analysis to come up with what you think is closest to the truth. So on the North 60 project, we are working with the developer to make sure that the market analysis supports the amount of office space, or I should say research space, that he wants to do. 2 million seems like a lot of space, but there does seem to be demand. And right now there's a group called the Weitzman Group, which is in the process of doing a more detailed report. They did a cursory report, you know, sort of an outline report, which the Board of Legislators had when they dealt with the lease back in 2016. Or 17, I don't know which year it was. But they're going to get a more detailed market study. We're going to see it. They're going to see it. And on the basis of that market study, which will also include the market for housing, there would be an amended lease. And if all parties are singing Kumbaya, we'll sign it. We'll go forward with it. If there's anything in that market study that gives us pause, then we will stop and we will have a further discussion. But we are not delaying North 60. We asked about the airport. The airport, for 2 straight years, my predecessor had a plan to change the governance of the airport. It was called privatization. Let's be clear. The airport is privatized right now. Nina, in phrasing the question, you took the common dialogue, which is that the county runs the airport. The county contracts with a company called Avports, which is now a holding of Goldman Sachs. A Goldman Sachs real estate entity is now the owner of Avports. We contract with Avports. We pay Avport money, and Avports runs the airport. The personnel you see there is not county employees. They're not union employees. They are working for Avports. So the county airport is already privatized. The proposal that was out there in 2016 and 2017 was to change the governance of the airport and then take the responsibility for the full running of the airport and then contracting it to a private entity. The first go around, it was a combination of investors under Oak Tree Capital. The second time through, after some scrutiny that the board had a couple of members to scrutinize, it was under Macquarie Development. Those companies are fine organizations. The question when I came into office is, this was presented as a way to balance the budget in 2016 and in 2017. It was a 40-year deal that we would lose control of the airport and we would get a ton of money up front, $15 million in the first deal, $20 million in the second deal, that would balance our budget for the current year. Well, we just balanced the budget, and we'll talk about the parking lot in a second. We just balanced the budget without having to trade in the airport for 40 years. We have issues at the airport that are public policy issues. It is a transportation hub, and it's important that it function as a hub, but it also has tremendous impact on the people that live near it or underneath its flight paths. If we turn that over to XYZ Corporation, then we are abrogating our responsibility to deal with those impacts on individuals. And, you know, for those of us, I know a couple of people in the room, I saw Greg Howells walk in. Some of us in Rye live near Playland. That's a similar type of situation. When somebody else owns and runs Playland and you don't like something, you can go to George Latimer or Catherine Parker all you want. We don't run it anymore. We traded it in for what's behind door number 1, if you've ever seen Let's Make a Deal. So on the airport, what I have said publicly is we are not presenting a deal for consumption, for money to monetize it. As it turns out, had we done either of the earlier deals, we would have sold ourselves short because the FAA reauthorization bill in Washington changed the rules and made it more flexible if you're going to do any of these kind of deals. And had we locked ourselves into a 40-year deal 2 years ago, we would not have used that system as best as possible. It remains an option, but as an option, it's something to be discussed at the Board of Legislators, with the executive branch, and with the community at large. And if and when we ever decided to do something like this, it would be a matter of public policy, not fiscal policy. And that's been my position on it. I think that's a logical, thought-out scenario. You didn't ask about Playland, but I'll throw Playland in because it's in the same group. My predecessor signed an arrangement with Standard Amusements. They are to take over the park November of 2019. We did an analysis of the deal, did not like it, did not think it protected the taxpayers of Westchester County. We said that publicly. But I'm also smart enough, even though I'm not a lawyer, to know that a signed contract is a signed contract. You just to go breaking them, you know, willy-nilly. There has to be some reason to do that. And right now we're in dialogue with Standard Amusements. We are discussing renegotiation of the contract. And we're also looking to make sure that all elements of the contract have been honored by us and by them. And if there's something that isn't the case, then we would go forward. In the meantime, Playland has deteriorated in the last 8 years, and I believe it was a purposeful neglect of Playland. It was a philosophy that says we shouldn't own an amusement park, and anything we can do to get rid of it is the right strategy. And there may be any number of people that hold that philosophy. I don't hold that philosophy. I think Playland is a unique situation. It's not what it was in the 60s. You know, when I went there as a kid, it's not going to be that kind of Playland. But Playland can be a profitable entity if it's properly managed and marketed, and it has not been properly managed and marketed for the last X number of years. And a commitment to do that has a generation of revenue to follow. It's not like, George, just throw money at that physical building, make it look nicer. It has the capacity to get greater attendance and therefore revenue that will pay back the investment made. And I have no problem with having a partner in doing that. And if it turns out to be Standard Amusement, that could be fine. It just has to be done on a different framework that we think benefits the taxpayers of Westchester County. And if you want to go further, go onto the Westchester website, westchestergov.com. We have to redo the website, let me be honest. Once you go in, it's going to say, oh, what a mess. But somewhere in there, you will find the report that was done in the spring. I call it the Nona McDonald report, done by 2 of our key executives, that outlined the concerns about the Playland deal. And then if you're interested in the issue and you want to see content, go read that and then draw some judgments as to how it is. But we're working in a negotiating status with it. As it stands now, we turned the park over to Standard Amusements November of 2019, absent any change in our relationship. The county still runs it throughout 2019, and we're having meetings right now about how to run it better than it's been run. We also, in terms in general of infrastructure, look at roads, bridges, a host of different things that the county has responsibility for. And we have not invested sufficiently to maintain those roads and bridges. Now, keep in mind that as you drive from wherever you're going, wherever you are to wherever you're going, you might go on a county road, a town road, a city road. You know, we don't know. You know, you see like a number of a number on Weaver Street that tells you it's a state road. You know, but you can't tell what's a county road and what's a municipal road. And many of us, well, maybe in this room many do, but many of us don't know when you cross that dotted line from the village of Larchmont into the unincorporated town of Mamaroneck. You know, you're on Devon Road, you make the left turn onto Kenmare, ding, 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 you're crossing the dotted line. How would you know that? The general repair of all of our roads is in bad shape because, number one, we live in the north and we have rough winters, and, you know, those winters affect the way the roads are. Number two, we have a lot more traffic on these roads than they were ever designed for. And number three, our budgets, all of our budgets are insufficient to constantly repair and fix the roads the way we would like to do it. And then throw in a number 4, anytime a utility comes in to do some major work, they have the authority to dig the road up, and their requirement of replacing the road is not to make it look like the best road you've ever seen, it's just to patch up whatever they dug up. And somewhere out there in the, if Tom wasn't in the room, I'd call it Murphy's Law. No offense, Tom. But somewhere out there, you know that the minute the water company has finished digging up the road, in comes the sewer repairs or something. So we seem to have this constant problem. We have in our capital budget this year at the county level certain money allocated to fix certain roads and certain bridges in the county. It's insufficient. And I have to tell you, the biggest bugaboo for me is the Bronx River Parkway. The Bronx River Parkway from the break, where the spring goes off to the left and the Bronx River Parkway goes north, that's a county road all the way up to Kensico. North of the county center, it's like okay. South of the county center is not okay. It looks really bad. And, anytime I drive up there, if you're driving in the right lane, there's little potholes and then there's trees a couple of feet off the road, you say to yourself, somebody's going to hit one of these potholes, lose control of the car, go into the tree, and the tort action is going to exceed the cost of the repaving of the road. And that's what we have to do. We have to repave that road, mill it back down, and go all the way back down and build it back up from soup to nuts. But we don't have money to do that. There isn't any capital project budget that we have where we could tackle that kind of a project in one fell swoop. So we're having to do it in piecemeal sections. This year we allocated, I forget how much it was, Catherine. You remember offhand? 3 million, 4 million, whatever it was. It was some number to do a piece of the Bronx River Parkway. And I think it's like the middle piece, south of White Plains and north of Scarsdale. I should know these numbers. She doesn't have to know these numbers. I should know these numbers. But the important part in this situation, in terms of infrastructure, as it is with the various the contracts, the other issues you've asked me about, because I'm almost done with my prepared comments, it is openness and transparency. If it's anything that I've tried to do over my 27 years of representing these two communities, is to be open and transparent. District office hours in this very room. How many times, Catherine, have you and I, Steve Otis, I was here with Judy Myers in the prior iteration of our responsibility, sitting here, 8 of you walked in the room, sometimes 30 of you walked in the room. How many times have I spoken here, there, anywhere, and so have my other colleagues in government to try to address things. This, to me, is the first most important change. We have to be open and transparent. We have to tell people when things aren't going well. We have to admit when we've made mistakes. I've made some mistakes so far this year in my tenure, and I'm not afraid to make it because the mission is to know that you've made a mistake so you don't make the same mistake again. This constant doubling down on a mistake, I mean, that's what I did when I was like 9 years old, Well, that's not me. That was Johnny. Johnny did that, not me. I wasn't, come on. I'm 65 years old now. Man up. But it's also important to know that we are in the middle of a test of whether self-governance works or not. And in the village of Larchmont, in the town of Mamaroneck, in the village of Mamaroneck, in the county of Westchester, we have to show our neighbors, those of us in the room who care, those who are in office, who used to be in office, we have to show our neighbors who aren't in this room, because the vast majority of people live their lives. They have their families, they raise their families, they have their careers, and in communities like this, their careers are very substantial things. You do not get a house in these communities by accident. You have to earn, you have to achieve, earn at a high level to buy in, much less to pay your taxes in an area like this. And the vast majority of our neighbors don't have the time to go through the town budget, come to a public meeting. I always think of my friend Ernie Odierna when he would get up on the town board and say, we're having a meeting on this and you guys ought to come, knowing that 5 guys are going to come. Because 5 guys are going to come. They care. The rest of the people saying, this is representative form of government. You make the decisions, and I'll hold you accountable for the decisions. And that's in essence what I took on when I made this race. Since I didn't think I was going to win in the beginning stages of it, perhaps it was like an opportunity to express ideas. But now that I have the job and I have a responsibility, then I want to make sure that I do a good job with this position. Because when I walk into this room after I'm out of public office, I hope I'm going to have days to come after I'm out of office, I still want to walk into this room. And I still want to see the people in this room who are friends of mine. And I still want to be able to look them in the eye and have them look me in the eye and have them say, George, you did a good job. All those years that you were in, all those jobs you had, you did a good job. This job is the culmination of all of those years. If we can, over 3 more years that I have, one in the basket, 3 to go, if we can do intelligent things, put the county back on the direction that it was for so many years under prior Republican and Democratic administrations, then that's good for me. I don't have to be county executive for life. And I know there's no Mount Rushmore for county executives, that doesn't exist. All it is the knowledge that when you run into the people that you know and like and have come to know for 30 years, that they look at you, they're comfortable seeing you, and you know that you did a decent job. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do a decent job.
Thanks, George. Now is the time for everyone else who has questions, and the hands are up already. So I'm going to start with Elaine.
George, now that the state legislature is in Democratic hands, the House, the Senate, the governor, and the head of the Senate is from Westchester, is this a time that maybe the county can negotiate with the state to take back the responsibility of Medicaid costs?
Well, I think, Elaine, the opportunity now with the state legislature is open-ended to raise a ton of issues. And one thing I didn't mention in my general comments are some of those non-property tax revenues that would represent a benefit to us on the revenue side. The Medicaid side, on the cost side, would be great if that mandate was relieved. When I was in the Senate and the Assembly, I was a co-sponsor of bills that would phase that out. In the aggregate, if you relieve that Medicaid mandate that I talked about, the $200 million that Westchester, $200+ million that Westchester pays, outside of New York City, that's a $2 billion cost. With New York City included, it's a $7 billion cost statewide to relieve the Medicaid mandate. The state itself has its own budget to worry about, so I really doubt that in the short term it's going to pick up that mandate in a fell swoop. The best we could hope for is a phase out over probably 5 to 10 years, depending on what the will of the governor is, and even as much more so than the legislature is. What I do think, when we sit with our friends in Albany, and they're friends, Shelley Mayers, Steve Otis is here, and so many other people, but they also work in a system, and I've been in the system, where it's not just their opinion or their vision. They have to work through in the Assembly, a very structured Assembly staff. In the Senate, Senate policy that's generally driven by individual members, and so there has to be a consensus to do some of the things we need to do. But over the course of the next few months, as the Senate and the Assembly and the governor deal with a host of issues that now can be dealt with that haven't been dealt before, the codification of Roe v. Wade, the issues of early voting reform, the DREAM Act, Child Victims Act, all of these are issues on the table that the legislature is going to deal with. There are also revenue issues on the table. Will we legalize sports betting? Question mark. Will we legalize marijuana? Question mark. Will we relieve not relieve, will we adopt internet sales taxation, which has now been made legal last year by a Supreme Court case? Those are question marks, and my friends in the state legislature know those are the issues. And when I sit and talk with them, it's not like I have to lobby them. We talk as colleagues, how likely is it to pass? How much of this, maybe not that. And then from the county standpoint, can we appeal for certain revenue streams, whether it's our rate of sales taxation? We have one of the lowest rates of sales tax in the state. We're down the last one of the 4 smallest counties. The cities of Westchester County have a higher sales tax rate than the county of Westchester does. So when you go to buy something in White Plains, and if they don't ask you your home address and they don't charge you based on your home address, you're paying probably 1% more than you are in these local areas. And so do we adjust that as part of it? Do we get red light camera authority? Everybody freaks out. Red light cameras, I hate them. You hate them because you're at a red light. I've gone through lights, yellow to red, and you get the ticket and it's not fun. They're in place in New Rochelle and Yonkers and White Plains and Mount Vernon right now, and they're a source of revenue. So is that question mark? Is that something that Westchester can get? Within the combination of both the social efforts that are going to happen in Albany and the things that affect us locally, I'm going to continue to do what I've done before, which is talk to my friends who are in the state legislature. I did that as a legislator, but I don't have any particular way to get them to do something special. And I respect them. I respect what Steve and Shelley, as our local representatives, are going to go through and how they're going to have to horse trade. The Senate is a first-time majority. That's not going to be easy to manage. It's not going to be easy to manage. I did that as a county legislator when I became chairman 20 years ago. It's not easy to manage a first-time majority. Andrea Stewart-Cousins is supremely well ready to do that. And in Shelley Mayer, she has a friend and a colleague who can help her in that process, but it still will be difficult to do. So we're hopeful that we'll have a fair hearing. I probably will be in Albany a lot this year. Maybe I can carpool with one of my friends and save a little gas. So.
George, recently when you spoke somewhere, you told us about a county newsletter, which some of us didn't know about, and I don't know whether everybody in this room does, but maybe you would give the contact information again, okay?
Yes, we have electronic news. The way it came up, somebody asked me when I was at Larchmont Temple over the weekend, and what was this alarm? 8:34. What was I thinking? All right. In any event, we have electronic newsletters now. You know, saves paper and all that stuff. Catherine Parker has an excellent electronic newsletter. I'm sure you're on her list. If you're not, see Catherine and make sure you're on that list. We have one called My Westchester that comes out every month. And if you're not getting it, then you can, if you want to jot this email down, Cioffi, C-C-I-O-F-F-I, at westchestergov, G-O-V, one word, westchestergov.com. And just say, would like to be included on the My Westchester e-newsletter. And if you want some back editions, of which we have, I think, 11, we're happy to send them on to you. And, you know, like any e-newsletter, it's selective in the information it tells you. It is not meant to be an objective news source. You know, it's telling you the little tidbits of news that the county government wants you to know. It's factual, but it isn't, you know, the same thing as getting the New York Times on your cell phone. But it's helpful. It'll tell you some things you might not know. It's called My Westchester Electronic Newsletter, Cioffi, C-I-O-F-F-I, C-C-I-O-F-F-I, at westchestergov.com.
George, you've been very aware that over the last week or so, various communities and organizations have been recognizing the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There are human rights committees throughout the county and at the county level. I know you touched on this just a moment ago, but maybe you could put some more meat on it. At the county level, I mean, there are 30 very challenging articles to the Declaration. What of those are you feel that are important in your addressing at the county level?
Well, we had a session last Thursday, I think it was, which was sponsored by our Westchester County Human Rights Commission in honor, David, of the 70th anniversary. And I had a chance to make some opening comments, and there were some very excellent speakers who spoke that day and some panel groups that met. The County Human Rights Commission, which we created a little over 20 years ago when I was in the county legislature, Audrey Stewart Cousins was head of legislation committee, I was chair, is the focus for our efforts on human rights and the ability to both through public education and through adjudication of claims of discrimination to be able to deal with the implementation of those things. And I think that's really what I said that day, David, when I spoke in my comments, is that we've had excellent declarations of principle. That document 70 years ago says what has to be said. When Martin Luther King said that August afternoon on the Mall in 1963 in Washington, the I Have a Dream speech, Franklin Roosevelt's Four Freedoms speech in 1940, go all the way back to the Declaration of Independence, at least in terms of what it meant to, what it said, much less what was actually implemented at that time. We hold these truths to be self-evident. The problem is less our declarations and a lot more our implementation. And I would argue that the work of this County Board of Legislators this year, and my support of that by signing things into law, is the manifestation of those declarations where we can in terms of policy. I mentioned before about banning the box. I won't repeat the content piece of it, but that is an example of an implementation of something in human rights. You paid your debt to society. You should be able to function with the opportunity to then go on and be gainfully employed in that society if your skill sets allow for that. The salary history law, which requires employers not to ask about a past salary history of a candidate, because invariably that locks primarily women into low pricing, low salary for the jobs that they take on, rather than offering them salary that's based on what's available within the company structure. Those things, I really poorly explained that, Bill. The bottom line, though, is I think we've tried to implement where we can at the county level, because we don't have the broad-based legislative authority that the state does. We've tried to implement some of these actions, and it's constantly a work in progress. Right now, the Human Rights Commission has put together a plan which we're vetting about how to deal with the explosion of hate crimes in the county. Now, we aren't seeing lynchings, but we sure are seeing racist and anti-Semitic markings everywhere you go. And what you don't know is how systemic this is going to be. We can make observations that over the last 2 years we've seen an increase in them. I remember, and this was something that came up at the summit of the day, there were swastikas that were put on a house in Orienta back in 1995. Those of us who were around in those days, we did a walk from downtown Larchmont all the way down to the site to show solidarity. And we had the church clergy leaders from all the major faiths as part of that walk and all the elected officials of the day. So determining what kinds of statements we need to make and outreach, David, is really what the challenge is now for us in implementing it. And I think at the county level, there's a sensitivity to this. We don't just pass it off, oh, young pranksters or something that just sort of minimizes it. Whenever there's something that's out there that's hateful, and I might add, you know, I'm of Italian and Irish background. The Irish and Italian communities are not the focus of hatred today, but they were when my antecedents came here. And there were awful things that were said about Italians and Irish, part of that immigrant population 100, 120 years ago. And so I find it despicable that people who are of descent from immigrants would then turn around and project that hatred to somebody else. So I would think that all of us, whatever our racial, ethnic, religious background is, we want to stand against hatred. Hatred against those who are African American, those who are Latino, those who are Jewish, those who are Italian, and those who are Irish and Polish, and every Asian, everything else under the sun. Hate has no home here. That's the sign. That's the sticker on your refrigerator, and that's our policy.
I think we have some back here.
Hi, Jack.
As you might know, George, Lighthouse, which has been serving the blind and visually impaired people in the region, is reorganizing itself, and as a result, it's giving up its mission in Westchester and Rockland counties. As of January 1, its Visions, which is the organization on the board, is taking over the mission in Westchester and Rockland County. So whatever help, support we can provide to provide that service, otherwise there will be a vacuum in the service here.
I think, Jag, that's a meeting we should have at White Plains to discuss this. Did everybody hear Jag's comment? Okay. It's more of a statement. What Jag basically said is that the Lighthouse, which is a not-for-profit that's been very prominent in the Westchester community dealing with needs of the people who are blind, is reorganizing out of Westchester. That's the gist of it. And there are certain services that they provided, and he is making the offer to try to see how we in the county can help compensate for the loss of those services. And so my response is we should have a meeting, get some key people, bring them into the county office building. We'll have members of the Board of Legislators join us. You can explain the circumstances, the need, and then we can figure out how best to respond to it.
I'll get the CEO off.
Okay. Very good. And Catherine, whatever the relevant committee person or legislator is, if you can do that too. David, okay, well, whoever it is, we'll go from there. Great. Thanks. Okay.
Morning, George.
Good morning,
So let me just say thank you for all that you do. You got a lot on your plate on current issues. Thinking ahead, though, if you even have the time to do that with all that's going on. Emissions is a huge problem in our environment, and I'm wondering how many terms will it take for us to guarantee you to have in order to get the county fleet to be zero emissions, and is it possible? What can be done about that? Because the infrastructure that you set up at the county level, as you said, will undoubtedly filter down through the municipalities, which also have the same issue but don't have the capital.
Well, we're making steps in the right direction. We recently bought 70, did everybody hear the question from Michael? So how do we get to zero emissions in the county fleet to reduce pollution and obviously greenhouse gas effect and so forth? We've just recently purchased 78 new articulated buses. Those are the ones with the accordion-like middle, which usually are used on our most heavily trafficked routes. And those 78 buses are in essence electric buses. And we had a press conference in, I guess, September, where we showed what one of the buses are like, and it's modern and so forth. And they're expensive. We had significant help from the state and the federal government to buy them. I think they're over $1 million a bus, although they're double-length buses. So but sometimes our municipal friends will tell you how much it costs to buy a fire truck. You know, they ain't cheap either, right? Jane Eni just did one of those, like, you know, eyeball roll things. So in any event, 78 new buses on our fleet. Ultimately, we hope to get all of them to electric buses, since it is expensive as it is. It sounds a lot like my Bronx River Parkway response, which is we make progress each year, and as we replace buses, we bring on those that fit this model of electric buses. We have established charging stations for electric vehicles in a couple of locations, and now we're looking at, I think, a series of 8 locations that tie into where we have parkland, and therefore access to the public, and to spread them around the county. Because the county owns land where it owns it. It's not a systematic ownership where we could, you know, put it up in, you know, key intersections and so forth. But we are trying to add to that list, and if we can add more than that, we will. We have some that are in place now, and there's some private sector situations now. You know, the White Plains Parking Authority has it. You know, the Courtyard Marriott has a charging station. So I think what you're going to see is we contribute to the, you know, to the infrastructure that's necessary to support electric vehicles, which you know, is what will be the coming percentage of the total. Our fleet now is partial. I don't have a percentage for you. There's a percentage of our county car fleet, which people use to go out. You know, the sanitarians that come out to inspect the restaurants. They go park their car in the garage, take a county car, go out, do the county's work, and come back. A percentage of our fleet now is electric vehicles, and we intend to do many more of them as we can. You know, we haven't done it yet with our police fleet. You know, apparently those Crown Vics or whatever it is that fly at 120 miles an hour to catch people seem to do better on fossil fuel than they do on electricity. So we may never get to 100% conversion if you count the police fleet, or the some of the specialty vehicles that we have, like the bomb squad truck and things of that nature. But I think you're going to see us make stride year over year. And offline, if you want to talk to me, I can probably get you some statistics about where we are, where we think we'll be over the course of the remaining 3 years. We will make progress toward having you know, significantly less emissions. And I think the bus fleet is probably the most important of them, because the amount of you know, pollution that they kick out into the atmosphere is pretty significant. So if we can convert all the bus fleet, that'll probably be the single biggest thing we can do along the lines you described. Okay.
Can you see any way that local, county, or state taxes can be reduced?
Well, here's the reality of things. If we as residents believe that the level of services that we're getting now is an essential level of service, then the answer to your question is no. If we're prepared to reduce the level of services that we have, then the answer is yes. And why do I say it so simply? Because if you're going to have, I don't know the numbers in the town, but there's X number of police officers, and they come with a certain salary and a certain level of benefits. There's X number of professional firefighters in 2 of the 3 communities that are hired to provide a service. If we believe that the saving of money is important enough, or your taxes, then we're going to have to reduce the workforce in those kinds of positions. Because there is no, and I want everybody to hear this, there is no magical line called fat in these budgets. People think that because they haven't scrutinized the budget. Those of us in the room who've been in public office have gone through budgets over and over and over again. And we say, well, let's take out travel, $10,000. Let's not have as many publications. Can we do with 2 people what we did with 3 people? And when you net all of those types of cutting through the budgets out, it doesn't save you the chunk of money that you want. You as a taxpayer want to see something significant. If I told you that I could cut county taxes 10%, let's go back to my model of $20,000. So you're paying $20,000 on property taxes. We contort to cut taxes by 10%. Nobody has ever tried to deliver a 10% county tax cut. How would we handle the buses and the sewer tree, everything I just said about? How would you handle that at a 10% tax cut? If we got to the 10% tax cut on a $20,000 tax bill, $4,000 of which is going to the county, a 10% tax cut saves you $400. Now, $400 is not nothing. But you tell me, how much service diminution are you prepared to accept to get that savings? So the frustration that you have and other people have when they come to me, they say, my taxes are killing me. You look at the overall structure of services that are provided. And I think the bigger problem is, as I've just described earlier, people don't consume all the services and they don't understand where the money goes. And because we have to run a prison, it's expensive. We need 300 some odd correction officers to properly maintain that prison. I can't cut that workforce by 10%. I've had some people during the legislative debate saying, well, we could just cut some money out of that. You don't know what you're talking about, because you have to run a certain amount of redundancy in a prison so that you can properly manage the inmate population, whether it's 800 people or 1,000 people. So the frustration in responding to you is that if we are going to agree as a society that we are going to cut back on mass transit, we're going to cut back on the number of times that the garbage is picked up on your street, that we're going to cut back on the number of police patrols that go up and down your drive, then we can reduce the workforce and the villages in the town can come back and say, okay, we're going to save you 10% on your village taxes. Now let's take the number down a notch. If you're paying $4,000 to the county, I think I said you're paying about $3,500 or $3,000 to your village or town combination, which means a 10% cut in village and town taxes represents an additional $300 savings. And so now you have to ask yourself, when I close that firehouse in Mamaroneck Village, is that worth $300 to me savings?
Worth your life.
Well, that's my point. Isn't that my point? This is a trade-off. This is a trade-off. And I certainly don't mean to direct this since you raised the question, but I deal with people all the time that send me letters. I got one here in my packet that I have to respond to. I can't believe you raised taxes 2%. How am I going to pay my taxes 2%? Ma'am, I can reduce services and reduce your property taxes. But don't assume that you can get the same level of services at the same level of taxation. Now, there's one other element to this, which is the biggest element, and that's the school district. The school district taxes exceed the municipal taxes by a lot. And those of us in state government, when I was in state government, believe that we have to shift a significant portion of the cost of schools off of the property tax and onto the income tax. And that's a structure that has not been looked at in New York State. Why would I do that? Isn't that just one pocket paying from the other? No. Because you pay property taxes based on some intrinsic value of your house. You pay income taxes based on how much you're earning. I was, early in my career, a salesman with a base and commission. When I had a good year of commission, I paid more taxes because I made more money. When I made less commissions, which never happened, of course, I had less money. And so that transition and then shifting certain local costs that fall on property taxes to the state government, which would fall primarily on income and business taxes, would represent the kind of tax savings that would give you some significant relief, which is what you're looking for. If you're paying $40,000 in property taxes, what's significant relief? $5,000 less, $7,000 less. That's a significant number. $7,000 less on a $40,000 tax bill ain't 10%. That's closer to 20%. And that's the frustration that I have, knowing the guts of government, and not necessarily in a room like this with people who understand government, but somebody who calls me, writes me, is angry, and I go through the county budget and I say, they have no interest in going through the county budget. They just know what they want, and they just don't want to pay as much in taxes. And for me to do that, I have to have the consensus of everybody that we're going to reduce the services. That's the only way to get your taxes down to some number that you think are appropriate. Well, shared services is a path to save a certain amount of money. We had a more robust analysis this year which showed us the potential of $7 million of savings in the first year of a plan that would be better. But here's the bottom line, and not necessarily at the county level of government, but let's look at municipal services. Somebody might say you could save money if you combine services between the three villages. How many times the two villages in the town? How many times have you heard that? Somebody puts a comment on when they used to have the Larchmont Gazette, and they had comments on things, and Judy, you read the comments on Judy Silverstein's thing, and someone would say, we have redundancy between the villages and the towns. We should merge it and all make it. You got a volunteer department, fire department in Mamaroneck. You have combination departments in Larchmont and Mamaroneck town. How are you going to combine that? How are you going to combine that? Theoretically, how are you going to combine it? It could be difficult, if not impossible. And that's what happens when people speak in generalities and they work off of how they feel, but they don't look at budgets and numbers and get into the weeds. And I have to tell you, that's what I've done for 27 years of my life. I get into the weeds. We get into the hard details of these things, and then when we say we've kept the budget down at 2% tax increase, that wasn't any wonderful trick. We went through a number of different dubious distinctions. I never did explain that parking lot thing, did I? Shall I do that quickly? I know, you're here all morning, right? The parking lot deal. Westchester County has, at one point in time, put land aside for the Bronx River Parkway Reservation. This dates back, I would say, to the 1920s by my general knowledge of it. And the river itself and the land around it was preserved as both a parkway for vehicles. In those days, you know, the Model Ts, A's, whatever they had in those days, would take a nice leisurely drive up to the Kensico Dam, and you had the river and you had land alongside of it, people to walk and enjoy the country. In 1932, I think, maybe 1933, the county center was built as an exhibition hall. It was built with private money, just for the record, and it was built as a park facility for the entertainment and enjoyment of people to go to see the things that you go to now, you know, reptile show and all that stuff. So the explosion of automobiles meant that you needed a parking lot to accommodate the people that went to the county center. And so sometime, I'm not sure what decade it was, I think in the 40s, you probably had a gravel parking lot, and then it got asphalted somewhere in the 50s, I suspect. But since I only came along in 1953, I'm not really sure that I actually saw it myself. As long as I've known it, you've had a series of parking lots, about 14 acres of parking lots, 1,500 spaces around the county center. The parking lot has been used as a parking lot for 5-6 decades minimum. Now, the underlying land is dedicated as parkland, but the land usage of the 14 acres is as a parking lot. In looking to balance the budget, I said very candidly we had a $60 million gap to close, and we needed to close it. We didn't have enough money to do it with non-property tax revenue. Wasn't going to raise property taxes 5, 6, 7%. Wasn't going to go into the fund balance and get ourselves downgraded again, so we did a one-shot. The one-shot we did was very different from the airport one-shot. The airport was as an asset that has multiple elements to it. This is one element. It's a parking lot, used as a parking lot for people who park their cars and go in the county center. And here's the dirty little secret. Most of them commute out of the White Plains train station into the city. By the way, that's not legal use of parking lot on parkland. You're not supposed to use it for that purpose, but nobody says anything until I say it in a public session with TV going. So when people tell me that, oh, this is a piece of parkland and how could you do this, we do it because we're transferring it from a county-owned budget line to a county-owned entity, the Local Development Corporation. Think of it as an enterprise fund that's run by the county. The head of the LDC is appointed by me, and it's Joan McDonald, who is the Director of Operations for the county. The minority leader and the majority leader, Catherine being one of them, appoint members to that LDC, and then I appoint 2 other public members. That 5-member board makes decisions for the LDC, and we determine we have to make an iteration to do this. But we understood that we could have a transfer of the parking lot from the county-owned to the county LDC-owned. There'd be a transaction of money. That $23 million would balance our budget, and that $23 million in bonds that they would borrow would be paid for by the amount of money of all the people that come in and pay $7 to $10, depending on the event, to park at the space. So it would work financially on that level if it's legal to do. Is it desirable to do? No, it's not desirable to do it. And so when we go to Albany in the first half of this year, we're going to talk about non-property revenue sources. And we hope that we can find a way to generate through 1, 2, 3 of these sources enough money to make sure that we have the revenue that we need to run the county government and not have to do this deal. And if we have to do this deal, we wouldn't start to do it until July, after the legislatures had, the state legislatures had their full opportunity to see what could be gained. And then at that point in time, if we have to do it to balance the budget, we will, and we'll do it with legislation that would be crafted to narrow the precedent that's being set here, and we'll do it as we do everything, an open public debate, Board of Legislators has to look at it, approve it, feel good about it, and all those things will be protections. It is not an ideal way to close the budget, but if we're worried about lowering our property taxes, we certainly don't want to raise it 6 or 7%. Those are the options I faced. And you know, people say, make the tough decision. And you make a tough decision, people say, well, you shouldn't have made that decision. That's, you know, that's why we get paid the big bucks now.
Any more questions? Okay. No. If there's time.
I know you've done something to assist our Latino, our immigrant population, but I wondered if you would elucidate, because they're being picked up by ICE trucks here. So I just want to know what you have done.
Well, the county legislature in 2017 proposed legislation that's been called the Immigrant Protection Act, and it provided a policy by how the county police and the county corrections departments would deal with undocumented immigrants when they come into their scope. And now, the county police do not, except in the Village of Mount Kisco, where we have a municipal arrangement, the county police do not do the normal street policing that a village, town, or city police department does. The county police interacts with people in park settings or on the highways primarily. But the format under this law would change the way that the county police and the corrections department would interact with those individuals. And to the extent that they do their job every day, they would do their job and deal with whatever the action or behavior was in front of them, as opposed to looking for violations of documentation as a criminal act to go after. So if a person is speeding 100 miles an hour and they get pulled over, they're dealt with because they've been speeding at 100 miles an hour and they face criminal justice for speeding at 100 miles an hour. They're not pulled over and then turned over to ICE so that ICE can take them out of the country as they've been caught speeding. That's sort of a very quick analysis of it. The legislation passed with bipartisan support last year in the legislature, vetoed by my predecessor. Insufficient votes to override. This year, the legislature made some modifications to it, met with police and correction officials and local police officials, made a few modifications that seemed to satisfy the law enforcement community, passed it again on a bipartisan basis, and I signed it into law. What it does not do, and no local government, no state, local, municipal government can, is override the federal government when the federal government has a judicial warrant. By law, they come in with the proper documentation in their hands and they want to possess John Doe, they're going to possess John Doe. We can't hold them back. And that's why when I've heard people talk about sanctuary city status or sanctuary county status, it's an unfortunate misnomer, because you know, unless you're literally going to hide somebody in a basement away from authorities, then you really can't provide them ultimate sanctuary if the federal government chooses to come in with proper legal authority. Now, your ability to communicate with those governments does not require you to voluntarily do what, say, Joe Arpaio did in Phoenix, Arizona, which is go out of his way to make sure that the number one action of his police department in Mariposa County was to find undocumented aliens and make sure that they're out of the country. So that's what the IPA does and what it doesn't do at 100 miles an hour. Catherine is a better person to talk about it in some detail, because she was part of the team that dealt with it in both 17 and then this year when it passed in 18. And I'm sure she's happy to cover that.
Unfortunately, our time is up. It's 9 o'clock, and I know there were still a few more questions, but I think we are done. I'm going to hand this over to Elaine, and I want to thank you, George, so much.
Thank you very much, all.
I want to thank you again, George, and I want to thank everyone for coming. Our next meeting is January 15th, where we will examine issues on the environment, around the environment that affect our area. So hope to see you then. Have a very happy holiday to everyone.